evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of Sirhan on X, coming to you live from Cincinnati, Ohio, in the United States of America. Hope everyone had themselves a wonderful 17th of June of the calendar year 2025. And warmer weather is finally coming through here in Cincinnati. Now it's going to hit the 90s here real soon. So, all of you that are watching or listening on various apps in the Cincinnati area, be prepared for sweltering weather. Take necessary precautions if necessary, and please go ahead and take care of yourselves by whatever means necessary because the hot weather is coming and it's going to begin. I've had to do the same thing myself, and I was on the NFL show just recently, and everybody's talking about the hot weather. It's coming. Everyone, in whatever part of town you're in, take active measures. Stay cool. Do what you got to do. Don't go outside unless you really, 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 really have to, because I don't want to hear any stories about heat strokes or anything else. Because yours truly having to work in this weather at times. Myself, I feel it myself too. So I always take extra precautionary measures. So just want to get that out of the way. Hope everyone had themselves a wonderful day today. Tonight is a bit of a historical night because it involves, actually, for the next 7 days, these two fighters have history all over the place on this day in boxing history. And we talk about two of the more significant fighters, maybe the more symbolic fighters when we talk about the significance of heavyweight history, and they deserve their credit, and I will be the one to give it. The first one takes place 44 years ago today in New York. It was the first encounter between Joe Louis and Billy Conn. We talk about the premier heavyweights, maybe the more significant heavyweights to ever step foot in a boxing ring, not just heavyweight, but maybe of all time. Joe Louis was one of them because he set records for all time and some of the more historically significant matches of all time, because there's a few this week I will be elaborating about. But just for today, we're going to talk about the middle of his historical run as the heavyweight champion of the world, 12 years, 25 successful title defenses, taking on the standout Billy Conn, who was at one point a premier light heavyweight, who wanted to embark on a quest to become the heavyweight champion. We're talking about a light heavyweight in Billy Conn, who was a top 5 all-time light heavyweight, throwing the names of guys like Ezzard-Charles, Archie Moore, Bob Foster, Tommy Loughran, and Michael Spinks, just to name a few of them. And like a couple of those before and after him, he wanted to have a shot at the heavyweight title. Who to take a shot at the heavyweight title than none other than the premier heavyweight of his time, the standout Joe Louis. Basically, this fight was in the middle of Louis's long reign. Competition started to wind down a little bit because Louis basically cleaned it out. Especially, we're talking 3 years after he pasted Max Schmeling face first on the canvas in the round 1, and that glorious rematch. So he's going to get tested by a premier light heavyweight who's looking to make history, because no light heavyweight has moved on to win the heavyweight championship. Actually, in fact, that no light heavyweight champion has moved on to win the heavyweight title, and that's what Billy Conn was trying to do. One of the premier fighters who knew the ring very well was Billy Conn, against the brutal punching Joe Louis, whose right cross maybe as hard as anyone in not just heavyweight history, but maybe in all of boxing history. So we go into this particular fight. A lot of questions need to be answered. Can Billy Conn hang with the great Joe Louis? Turns out he had his moments, especially early on, when he basically gave Louis a boxing lesson early, basically timing Louis perfectly with counter shots and basically not allowing Joe Louis to get off early in the fight. Controlling the pace, especially in the early rounds, which was basically the Billy Conn forte for the longest time, because Billy Conn was one of the real ring masters of what you would call ring generalship, which is one of the 4 elements of scoring fights, maybe in the history of scoring fights. And that's how Conn was controlling Louis basically for the get-go in what turned out to be a pretty darn good early rounds for him. But as the fight was starting to wear on, in typical Joe Louis fashion, Joe Louis was starting to find his mark and niche as the rounds went on, finding home for that sledgehammer right, starting to make his mark a little bit as the fight wore on. But still, Billy Conn showed why he's an all-time great himself, giving Louis everything he can handle, taking what Louis had to offer and giving back. But still, Louis kept coming. But every time Louis kept coming, Conn had an answer for it, and it was basically a pretty darn good fight, and a fight that Conn had virtually in control for the most part, simply because he did not allow Joe Louis to get off the hard-hitting power that he was been known for. So we fast forward to later on in the fight, and as the fight went on, Joe Louis gradually shows his greatness as he started to find his niche when it comes to getting to Billy Conn. And in this particular instance, the right hand now starts to find its mark. And as the 13th round came around, a fight that Conn virtually had in control, all he had to do was stay away, but he didn't. Got into an exchange with Joe Louis. The perfectly placed left-right combination by Joe Louis floored down and out Billy Conn in the 13th round, and Joe Louis retains an undisputed heavyweight championship of the world as Conn was down and out. The synopsis of this was we never had an all-time great light heavyweight still win the heavyweight championship. This is probably the closest at the time we had, simply because Billy Conn was a premier light heavyweight. But when you talk about the legacy of Joe Louis, which I will talk about virtually all week because there's a lot of Joe Louis history this week, you wasn't going to touch him from 1937 to 1949. And even though Billy Conn tried and came the closest, Joe Louis has found a way to win. Probably the hardest hitting right cross in boxing history at the time. We could sit about the back end of the 30s and the 90s. Excuse me, the 30s and the 40s. I apologize. And his ability to just turn it up and put you down and out, just like he did with Billy Conn, among others, was a testament to the greatness of the great Joe Louis. And he had significant fights in boxing history. This was one of them. Even some before and some after. Talk about the 2-fight series with Max Schmeling. Of course, when he won the title from James J. Braddock, among many others. But we talk about the legacy of Joe Louis, and we talk about unbreakable records. He hasn't. I mean, in the political world of the sport as we know it today, and given how political it is with governing bodies all over the place, no one's touching what Joe Louis did. I mean, if somebody's trying to sell some weird ideas as to how it could be broken, it's not going to be broken no matter how hard you try, because it wasn't that Joe Louis was wearing belts. He was the champion. We talk about lineal champ, one belt era. Joe Louis had it, and no one was taking it. And this is one of the closest at the time it came, because people viewed let me back up. People viewed Joe Louis as an invincible force, and Billy Conn had a lot of his moments when you talk about the Louis-Conn fight the first time, considering the fact that Billy Conn used the ring and used the smarts to avoid Joe Louis's power for the longest time. This just shows us how great of a fighter Billy Conn was. Because we talk about the light heavyweight division, he's a top 5 fighter in that weight class of all time. We talk about guys like Ezzard-Charles, Tommy Loughran, Archie Moore, Bob Foster, and Michael Spinks, just to name a few of them. He's in the middle of all that. Some people call him the greatest. Maybe had the greatest prime at light heavyweight, although guys like Charles had a longer prime. Moore was just more like the Nolan Ryan of boxing, where he just kept on and going on, and basically had a longer career. But Conn might have had the greater prime of those three. But we talk about the significance of the Joe Louis run, because a lot, given his time in the military and what he was fighting for the longest time, especially when you talk about, because I'll touch about this next week, the second fight he had with Max Schmeling. And we talk about that fight he had with Max Schmeling back in 1938, where he pasted Schmeling face first with his button knee on the canvas. Louis wasn't just fighting for himself or defending his championship. He was fighting for something more significant. We talk about what was going on back in the society world as it is back in the 30s and 40s, because that's what it was back then. But what did Joe Louis do? Basically just duck no one, took all names, and beat all comers and clean out the heavyweight division. And I'll touch on more on Louis later on this week, because he had some significant moments this week. And we're not just significant moments for Joe Louis. We're talking about significant moments in boxing history, because that's what Joe Louis had. Simply put, that's how Joe Louis was. But it was 84 years ago today in New York, where he got all he could handle from the great Billy Conn, who tried to become the heavyweight champ after establishing his greatness at light heavyweight to become the heavyweight championship, but didn't happen because he was in the middle of the reign, probably the most untouchable record in boxing history. When you talk about the great Joe Louis, did all he could. Louis stopped him, and that was all she wrote. Because anytime Joe Louis hit you, you were going on the canvas. That's how tough this fight was. But Really was a terrific fight. Probably one of the better all-time great fights. Khan did come back to have a couple wins later, and they was talking about a rematch, but because both were called to be a part of World War II, the rematch didn't happen until 5 years after that first fight. And it turned out to be a case of both fighters, maybe because having been away for a few years, turned out to be a bit of a dud. But the story with this one, the rematch, was the same thing as the first fight. Didn't matter whatever Billy Conn did. Joe Louis just had an answer for, stopped Conn in the 8th round. And we talk about, again, the significance and the historical impact of Joe Louis. It was virtually unstoppable and almost undescribable because it's not just about fighting to defend his championship or whatever. He was fighting for a lot of things at the time because I won't divulge into the political aspect of it because I'll touch on that next week with the Schmeling fight. But that tells you what Joe Louis was fighting for. And as he was continuing on his reign, there were people that didn't, I don't want to use the word hate, but sort of the boxing intelligentsia found something wrong with it because after a while, after Joe Louis beat Jersey Joe Walcott in those 2 fights, he retired, but now it turns out the IRS wanted him and it forced Joe Louis to come back unnecessarily to lose to Ezzard-Charles and Rocky Marciano. Tells you what he was really up against at that time. I can dig deeper with this, which I will do next week because there's a lot of Joe Louis history, especially in the month of June, where a lot of his marks took place in the month of June. But that was the significance of the great brown bomber Joe Louis when he had that right hand that pasted Billy Conn twice in 2 fights in a 5-year period. But the second fight after the hiatus from the sport due to his time in World War II, you almost had a feeling that the decline was starting to come because in that second fight against Conn, both Louis and Conn showed signs of slowing down. Billy Conn didn't fight much after the second fight, had 2 fights, lost eventually to the standout Tony Zale, among others. But both fighters' place in history definitely secure. They're up there among the real all-time greats, at least in their divisions. But when you talk about Joe Louis, maybe a top 5 all-time, we're talking like all-time pound for pound great. I mean, Sugar Ray Robinson, Muhammad Ali, Joe Louis, Henry Armstrong. Anybody after that, you can put a name into it. But that's my big 4 right there. You throw a Willie Pep, a Sadie Sadler, a Sam Langford, a fighter known, probably the greatest fighter to have never fought for a title. A lot of reasons for it. You want to go more modern, maybe someone of a caliber of like Roberto Duran or a Ray Leonard you could throw in there. But probably throw a George Foreman in there. We consider what he did in his second tenure. But we talk about the upper echelon of the surreal all-time greats, given what he stood in the ring for, what he was fighting for, and everything that he did in that ring. Joe Louis has every bit the claim to everyone else as the greatest ever. His record speaks for itself. It's never going to be touched for very various reasons. I apologize for being unable to speak today, but that is what Joe Louis was all about. So Joe Louis's history, I'll be touching on it throughout the week because this is basically Joe Louis week. There's at least 4 or 5 significant fights. But we talk about the cultural aspect of what he was going through at the time. From back then, it wasn't just him defending his title. It was him fighting for many things. And when I touch on the second fight with Max Schmeling, I will entail a lot more of those because there was a lot going on back then during his reign as champion. And there was an HBO documentary. I would highly recommend it as to how the world owes Joe Louis a massive apology. I think it's the documentary called Joe Louis Betrayed. I won't divulge into it because it's too political. I don't use my platform for such a thing. But it's something I would highly recommend everyone watch. Just a terrific all-time great. And anyone in the boxing community, don't even think about trying to break his record because it's not worth it. Because the sport's too political today to even touch it, among many other things. We talk about Billy Conn. As I said, we talk about the all-time great light heavyweights, a deep list also. He's up there with them. I mean, Ezzard-Charles probably gets the number 1 nod. Conn maybe slight behind him, although some would give Conn the nod over Charles because Conn had the better peak. Charles' peak was probably longer and not far behind. We consider Charles has the 3 wins over Archie Moore, but Charles and Conn is a toss-up. But I think in all these mythical matchups you want to put in, Conn would compete against anyone in that division anytime because he had the ring IQ and the skill set for it. That's what Billy Conn was. Mention guys like Archie Moore, Tommy Loughran, Bob Foster, Michael Spinks, even a couple other guys like a Tiger Flowers and a Harold Johnson in there. Those are the great light heavyweights, and Billy Conn's definitely up there. A lot of great fights himself. Actually, there was an interview back in the early 90s on the old USA Tuesday Night Fights when they traveled to Billy Conn's home, and he was talking about the 2-fight series with Joe Louis. That should tell you the legacy and the legendary status of the great Billy Conn. Just a standout all-time great light heavyweight himself. Gave Joe Louis all he can handle in that first fight before Louis took over. Both terrific fighters. And another one that took place, this one took place at Yankee Stadium about a decade later. This was the first meeting between Rocky Marciano and Ezzard Charles. Same situation here. Ezzard Charles had the long run as a light heavyweight. Couldn't get a title shot for whatever reason possible in that weight class. So he goes up to heavyweight, does have a 4-fight series with Jersey Joe Walcott, where he did win the heavyweight championship in the first of their 4 meetings. Also beat Walcott in a rematch, as well as a faded Joe Louis. Lost it to Walcott in their third fight and couldn't regain it in the 4th fight. So Walcott fights Marciano in their 2-fight series. The first fight where Marciano was behind, but landed the lethal right hand that pulverized Jersey Joe Walcott for the knockout of the year that year to win the heavyweight title. And he would get the rematch on a first-round knockout over Walcott. So now we have Marciano versus Charles. The Rock versus the Cincinnati Cobra. Ultimate style matchup. Slickster versus puncher. Defensive specialist versus the aggressor. Perfect foils. Terrific fight. And this fight was a case of Ezzard Charles looked like he was going to be able to regain the heavyweight championship. Gets off to the terrific start. Keeps Marciano at bay for the longest time, especially in the first 4.5 rounds where he controlled basically most of the fight. But when Marciano started to turn on the aggression, as people knew Rocky Marciano did at the time, a lot of things changed. Ezzard Charles started to get defensive and was basically unable to counter anything Rocky Marciano did because Marciano started to step up the gas a little bit. And when he started to step up the gas, a lot of things changed, especially Ezzard Charles, who even though he controlled the early part of the fight, had a hard time keeping Marciano off of him. And it was Rocky Marciano basically in a workman's effort as the fight wore on and having Charles hurt in the late rounds of the fight, managing to win a unanimous decision on the judges and a referee scorecard. For you, so you newbies, let me remind you, back in the 50s and 60s, it wasn't just the 3 referees that would score the 3 judges that scored fights. Back then, there was 2 judges and a referee, and they were scoring on the round system. Basically, between 8 to 10 rounds were given to Rocky Marciano simply because he just became the effective aggressor from about the 6th round on and just took the fight over. And Ezzard Charles, I don't know what happened, just didn't have an answer for anything Marciano did. As Marciano started to step up the aggression, he started to land the showier punches, and he retained his heavyweight championship and went to a record of 47-0. The real synopsis with this was the first fighter and the only fighter, being Ezzard Charles, to take Rocky Marciano the full 15-round distance, and actually did a good job early controlling the pace. Also did a good job surviving the pace of this particular fight because we know the Rock was coming. Ezzard Charles was a terrific fighter at light heavyweight, had a good run at heavyweight. But we know the story of Rocky Marciano. He went undefeated, fought twice more after this. Actually, one of the 2 fights was a rematch with Ezzard Charles in a fight where basically Moore just blasted Charles out of there in 8 rounds. And in this particular fight, and in the synopsis of the career of Rocky Marciano, he just couldn't beat him. His career obviously is going to get nitpicked by the boxing intelligentsia. I get it. No one's going to anoint him the greatest thing ever. I mean, anybody does, they can't be that crazy. It's not a shot at Rocky Marciano. You can only fight who's in front of you, and who was in front of Rocky Marciano wasn't going to beat him. I mean, the record speaks for itself. I mean, you talk about all these mythical matchups, or you can say, oh, he can't cut it in today's heavyweight class. Who said? I mean, what's your conclusion of it? I mean, you can't compare what he did to some of the guys today simply because, let me remind you, back in those days, there was no cruiserweight division, and basically the heavyweight division was over 180 pounds, and Rocky Marciano is fighting at 189. I mean, anybody with, I mean, anybody with a punch is going to have a chance in any fight, and we know Rocky Marciano had a punch. I'm not going to play the hypotheticals because I think that's just ignorant, especially for those in the boxing community who do this a lot. But when you talk about Rocky Marciano, you got to give him one thing. Whoever they put in front of him, he beat him. It's no way to sugarcoat it. I mean, you can nitpick his record like some people do to guys like Floyd Mayweather and Joe Calzaghe because they retired undefeated. That's fine. But the thing is, when you think about it, I mean, he beat everyone. Whether probably a top 15 all-time great heavyweight. Maybe you could put him in the top 10 lower half because his era was after Joe Louis and before Muhammad Ali. And that division started to flatten out a little bit. I mean, great wins over guys like Moore, Archie Moore, Floyd Patterson, not Floyd Patterson, excuse me. Of course, Walcott twice and Ezzard-Charles twice. Not the resumes that Ali and Lewis obviously had, but his place in heavyweight history is secure. I mean, he went 49-0. You have to give him that. I mean, that's everything else is just more opinionated things, and you're not going to change history, even though how hard you try. Some people call him overrated. I won't go that far. I think that's just stupid talk. You better have a real reason for it. But his place in history secure and unmatched for his time. Was forced to retire after his last fight because people wanted maybe we could get a Marciano Ali fight and a passing of the torch situation. A lot of reasons for it. Who knows? And the unfortunate tragedy with the airplane crash that took his life in the early 60s. But Rocky Marciano is a legend. A lot of people want to nitpick it. Have at it. Doesn't deter the fact the guy's a legend. Doesn't deter the fact the guy retired as the undisputed heavyweight champion in the one belt era. And that's what Rocky Marciano was at the end of the day. Now we talk about Ezzard-Charles. I've talked about this when we talk about athletes that come out of where I'm living in Cincinnati, Ohio. Number one, because he has the street, he has the mural. I mean, the mural is literally the size of the global debt. I mean, that's how big that mural is painting in the middle of I want to say that's Liberty Street down there. It's beautifully done too, I should admit. If you guys live in Cincinnati, walk by there. It's right next to TQL Stadium in Cincinnati. You can't miss it. It's a big, beautiful stadium printed of Ezzard-Charles, the Cincinnati Cobra. Terrific. The street named after him, the park where I was at a month ago when I was talking about one of his all-time great fights. And we talk about his stature among all-time great light heavyweights. A lot of people anoint him number one. I'll try to put my Cincinnati bias aside for this and go for it. I mean, he beat wins over guys like Charlie Burley, Joey Maxim, and Archie Moore, 7-0 against those guys. That gives him a bit of a tipping edge. And basically, we talk about him and Moore. Some people put Moore over him. Of course, Archie Moore went on to win the light heavyweight title later on. But again, Charles couldn't get a title shot in that division for whatever reason it is. So that's why he ventured to heavyweight to win the heavyweight title when he beat Jersey Joe Walcott in 1951. And basically, we talk about his history. There's a part of Cincinnati that's devoted to him, and they're still devoting stuff to him to this day. That should tell you the legacy that Ezzard-Charles has here in Cincinnati. I've always said, you want to talk about iconic athletes that came through Cincinnati? The list is a top of the food chain, and Ezzard-Charles is number one on that list. I mean, a lot of people put some others up there. I need to know the criteria. But for my money, because of how they're still dedicating stuff to Ezzard-Charles and honoring his commitment to community responsibility, which is what he's always wanted, that's why he gets number one. You talk about the ones that come through Cincinnati. Obviously, Ezzard-Charles is on the top, as I said. In the boxing fraternity, the other standout, Aaron Pryor. A case of what could have been if he not gone through alcohol and drugs, but still arguably the greatest junior welterweight to come through. massive record of 39-1, probably the greatest junior welterweight of all time. He's a Cincinnati icon like Charles. Some of the other athletes that come through here, of course, you talk about basketball, none other than the Big O, Oscar Robertson, first to average a triple-double. He's on the Cincinnati upper list of Cincinnati greats. Talk about, obviously, baseball. Johnny Bench, the greatest catcher in baseball history. He's a Cincinnati icon. His longtime sidekick, Joe Morgan, part of the Big Red Machine that went back-to-back in 75 and 76. He's on the Cincinnati icon list. They had a statue out of both Bench and Morgan outside the Great American Ballpark in Cincinnati. We talk about the NFL, Anthony Munoz and Ken Anderson of the Cincinnati Bengals, key pieces of the first Super Bowl appearance they had in 1981. And to trace back to the Cincinnati Reds for a second, I'll add Barry Larkin, who is still a part of the Cincinnati community, especially with the Reds, a street named after him, and he's doing excellent job with a commentary gig, calling Reds games, has a street named after him, just like Ezzard Charles does. And the conclusion is when Luciano Lucho Acosta was here in FC Cincinnati soccer, electrifying Cincinnati in ways that haven't been electrified for such a long time. That's the Cincinnati icon list. Ezzard Charles, Aaron Pryor, Johnny Bench, Joe Morgan, Barry Larkin, Anthony Munoz, Ken Anderson, and Lucho Acosta. Out of all of that, number one is always going to be Ezzard Charles because they're still contributing everything to him. Winning the heavyweight championship meant a lot to him and the city when he did it, and especially when he filled Music Hall 80 years ago when he beat Archie Moore in the second of their 3 fights. That should tell you the impact Ezzard Charles has over here. Actually, they erected a statue over here where I was at earlier this summer. Let's just tell you about that. And to have the legacy for him to be able to survive the 15-round distance with a top fighter like Rocky Marciano at a time when Rocky Marciano was knocking everybody out, in a way, it almost enhanced his legacy because Rocky Marciano was knocking guys out all over the place. Said a lot about Ezzard Charles to be able to survive that distance and find a way to last the distance. Even after the fight, the referee who scored the fight says, I was impressed at how smart of a fighter Ezzard Charles was. Did all he could to keep Rocky Marciano off of him, but Rocky Marciano was just a level above him, and that's why he got the decision. Of course, this prompted a rematch several months later, and in the rematch, after an early knockdown, Ezzard Charles actually came back and had his moments, cut Rocky Marciano, and it looked like he was going to pull the shocker because the cut was very, very bad to where doctors had to look at it. But again, after the cut happened, Marciano turns on the aggression, stops Ezzard Charles in the 8th round to retain his heavyweight championship. So that was a heck of a 2-fight series between those two. And we talk about the legacies of both of them, just like we talk about with Louis and Conn, secure in their weight classes, secure basically overall in boxing history. Nitpicked any way they want, but it doesn't matter. It's secure. You're not changing it. Just a terrific 2-fight series there between Marciano and Charles. Ezzard Charles stamped himself among the Cincinnati icons. Marciano's place among boxing history, especially in the heavyweight division, top notch. We get confused with all of these divisions back then. Let me remind you, it was like there was no juniors or supers. It wasn't even a cruiserweight division back in those days because you were going straight from light heavyweight to heavyweight. I mean, anything over 180 pounds was classified as a heavyweight. I mean, if Rocky Marciano was fighting today, he'd probably be classified as a cruiserweight. Doesn't mean that. Are you trying to say if he's classified as a cruiserweight, he wasn't going to be great? I mean, the guy went undefeated, so he did something right. And as far as Ezzard Charles goes, he can compete in any era. I mean, he was a typical fighter with a kind of a style that would have lasted at any era. Not saying he would have beaten everyone, but just a terrific light heavyweight himself, and that's who he was at the end of the day. So it was a historical moment for both Joe Louis and Rocky Marciano. Of course, the unfortunate thing for both of them was an unnecessary fight that took place in 1954 where Joe Louis basically shouldn't have been fighting at that point, just got obliterated in 8 rounds by Marciano in basically a fight that had no business taking place. But because the government was out for Joe Louis for whatever reason, he had no choice but to come back, and that's why that happened. But doesn't deter the fact that Joe Louis and Rocky Marciano are two of the 10 greatest heavyweights who ever lived. And we talk about the upper echelon of light heavyweights, even though they failed in their attempts to win the heavyweight title on these particular days. Ezzard Charles, Billy Conn, among the all-time great light heavyweights. You could arguably say the top two all-time. I mean, boatloads in that division also. Throwing a Gene Tunney in there at light heavyweight, I forgot about him. Terrific in that weight class. Arguably a top 5 light heavyweight himself was Gene Tunney. Just terrific history all the way around today. More Joe Louis and Rocky Marciano this week because the end of June, lots in the historical perspective, belong basically to those two guys. And you're talking about historical significance. These two guys had it. And we think about some of the trends that took place today, especially in the heavyweight division, trace back to what these two guys did. They left a heck of a trail, opened a heck of a path, and basically their places in history are going to be forever secure. Kudos to both of them. Actually, kudos to all 4 fighters: Joe Louis, Billy Conn, Rocky Marciano, and Ezzard Charles. 4 terrific all-time fighters. If you got the time to read stories about all 4 of them, I would highly recommend it. Just standout stuff. And that'll wrap up this historical edition of Sirhan on X. I will be back tomorrow night. As always, make self-care your top priority in life. If you take care of yourself first, everything comes your way in the good and most positive way possible. If you don't take care of yourself first, nothing else matters in life. Anyone who misses this particular show tonight can catch the audio versions on the Apple, Spotify, and iHeartRadio apps, as well as the replay on the X platform, which I will be presenting this show more frequently than not. And I hope everyone here has themselves a wonderful rest of the night. I will be back tomorrow night. But until then, good night. Take care of yourselves. God bless and enjoy the evening.